Good Sunday morning, everybody. And as we move our way through summer and move our way into August, it kind of tells us that summer is moving on. And now that we've raised the subject of evolution, we realize we're moving on with it. There is no such a thing as standing still. We either go leadership ways, participants, or we are static and we're carried along anyway. So anyway, that's not my point today. As you know, Pope Francis has been making his journey, penitential journey he called it, across Canada to speak to the indigenous people, First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis, and to try to bring them a message of hope and reconciliation and healing. A lot of people will say, you did a great job. A lot of people say, not so. You failed. And people in between, yes and no. So I don't know. It's pretty much a mixed bag as far as I can tell. But anyway, I'm going to give you a little bit of my sight on it, which I think might be a little bit different, because my authority this morning is the Star. Because I was working this week, again, I didn't get to see very much television on it. So I really don't know too much about what Francis said or did. However, I want to start with the gospel this morning. You see, one day, Jesus is getting along very nicely. And somebody in the crowd said, "Teacher, I've got a conflict in my family over money. Would you settle it for me?" Well, Jesus was not going to get caught in the middle of a triangle. No, he's too smart for that. He said, I'm not a judge. I'm not a judge. Oh, those words are powerful, my friends. Then he went on to tell a story about a rich man. He was doing pretty well. He was rich, but never satisfied. He always wanted more. And so he was going to tear down his old barns, build bigger barns. Now, the gospel says greed. Well, greed takes many different shapes and sizes. It can be money, but it's more than that. It's a greed for power. Greed for having a superiority to dominate and manipulate other people. It's privilege. And a few months ago, we heard a lot about white privilege, elitism, and how when you get that mentality, it's almost as if your brain are wired differently. When greed dominates a person's thinking, it's almost as if their brains are wired in such a way that that's it. Deep in their heart of hearts, that's what they want and pursue with all their might and main. So that's kind of what we're talking about here today. Because you see, way back in the colonization area, when Christopher Columbus was making a name for himself, yes, there was a colonization of Canada. There was a colonization of North America. There was the colonization of South America. How many other countries were there colonization? Where the greedy said, we're not satisfied with the land we have. We're going to go out and take other land. And to do that, we will colonize what they called the savages. People who didn't have the right religion. People who were living kind of illiterate lives. And so we'd be able to, and as our Prime Minister said of the day, in that day, take the Indian out of the Indian. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to assimilate the native people. And now we have the native people, like I say, First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis, we had all come under that indigenous name. And the Europeans came, they did come. Settlers, we call them. And they were able to move that movement. It was a movement towards assimilation, but it was more than that. And the topic came up during France's visit to Canada, although as far as I know, he didn't use the words when he was in Canada, but he did use them on the airplane when he talked to the journalists on his way home to Rome. The whole notion of genocide. Now, genocide, it takes many sizes and shapes. And the whole idea of the residential school, from the First Nations people's perspective, it's a form of genocide. It's a form of genocide. Even though the Prime Minister who initiated this, it was primarily assimilation. So it's two different words, but it ended up meaning the same thing, which is the trauma of not only the children who were taken to the residential schools, but to their parents and their grandparents, and the trauma that's been intergenerational ever since then, as First Nations people have tried to come to grips with the trauma of that time. And of course, we know that the foundation for a lot of this stuff was the doctrine of discovery, where the explorers were told that with this doctrine of discovery, when you reach those lands, you have an obligation. Plant our flag, so we claim the country for the country, our country. And when you've planted the flag, then assimilate or colonize the people who are already there. And that's been predominant here in both North and South America. And so it's had a devastating effect, no question about it, on past generations and many today. Now, I can't summarize up France's trip here. He took a whole week. I can't sum up unless I want to preach for a week, and I don't think you'd listen to me for a week. But I went to the Toronto Star, and first thing I saw in there was a picture, and I hold it up to you. Can you see the picture? It's a picture of the sanctuary of the church in Edmonton. What do you see? And today I'm asking you to use the word see. And those who have heard me frequently know I talk about seeing. What do you see? What do you see when you look at something? So it's not what you see, it's how you see. And I'm sure a lot of people would see one thing when they look at this picture. It's the sanctuary of a church, I guess. But what I see is so symbolic, because outside the sanctuary are your indigenous people. Outside. There's a line. There's a line. And then the other side of the line, what do you see? First of all, a whole bunch of men. No women. Secondly, clergy. No lay people. Bishops. No chiefs in the sanctuary. I don't think. No, I don't see any. So right away, like that picture, when I look at that picture, it tells me a story. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think that picture indeed is worth 1,000 words. The colonial thinking is still there. For the people who planned this pilgrimage of Pope Francis. And I think he did a tremendous job, and I'm very proud of him. But having said that, of course, the trip is planned. And although in the beginning, and they did use some consultation with Native people, our indigenous people, to plan the trip, but predominantly it was the settlers' descendants. And that's where we have to look at this. When we see that picture, settlers, we're in a picture. We're in the sanctuary. Yes, you are. We're in there by reason of our relatives, the men that are there, whether we like it or not. They are there. And there is that connection. And that's what a lot of people in Canada don't get it. They say, well, I wasn't born. I wasn't alive when all this happened. Don't include me. Well, science, quantum physics shows very clearly that we are all one at one time. There's only the eternal now. And in your genes, in your generational ties, you were there. I was there. And even today, how many people I've listened to during the past week who still say, why don't they get over it? It happened a long time ago. They're being well looked after anyway by the government. What have they got to complain about? Attitude. I see attitude. That's not good. Not good for healing. Not good for reconciliation. So that's what I'm saying. And the other thing I see in that, of course, when I look at that picture, I see spirituality. And what I see in that picture, in the sanctuary of the church, separate from the indigenous people, I see the spirituality of fall and redemption. Fall and redemption. That is a spirituality that they brought there. The very prayers of a Eucharistic prayer, if you listen to them carefully, they speak about fall and redemption. They do. They speak of fall and redemption. And even use of Latin in some of that Mass. Unbelievable in the 21st century, because it represents that whole history of dominance and colonization. Should never have been used. So here we have it. That picture's telling me, here is a spirituality of Catholicism, Christianity, much of Christianity, of fall and redemption, of original sin and atonement, of a sky God. We still have a sky God addressing our Heavenly Father. That's old stuff, and it sufficed then, but this is the 21st century. And yes, today, there is another kind, and that is the kind that we read about or saw on TV of smudging, lighting the oil, the drumming, the keening. There are so many ways in which the spirituality of our native people manifested itself. Now today it has a name for it. Matthew Fox has given it the name creation spirituality. And I've been, when I was a kid, when I went to Tall Pines and took pine boughs and built a little shelter beside a creek and sat there for hours as a kid. I was a kid, 11, 12 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, except I know I was doing it. Intuition was calling me to go there, and I did. Now I know. It was creation spirituality. It was a gift that was given to me and was taken away from me in the seminary. It was only years after being ordained that I could claim my spirituality, to move away from the fall redemption stuff and try to recapture my original spirituality, which is today known as creation spirituality. And that's what you see when you read about the actions or saw the actions of our indigenous people, you were able to see that. You were able to see that it's the land. I remember in the first parish I was stationed at, and the first funeral I did of an indigenous person. So it was all the typical Roman Catholic ritual till we got to the graveyard. And after I'd finished with my prayers, they said, okay, now, we take over now. And for the first time in my life, I heard keening. Keening. And that came from within them. And it rose up and it just grabbed you. And I said, my God, I wish I could do that. I wish I could. And then I read we're in the far north. A lot of musicians, for example, it's sounding, the noise of sounding, the beauty of sounding, the voice, just sounding. Not any particular words, but coming from the heart, that the use of the breath to praise God. So this is what I'm looking at today, and we're going to hear more about it, because I am going to definitely investigate and see if I can't communicate with people more and more my own lived experience of creation spirituality. For example, I'm recording this at noon here in my apartment. As soon as I finish, I'm going out and sit by the river. For many years here in Peterborough, when I was able, I walked in Jackson's Park. And any people who live in Peterborough and walked in Jackson's Park, you just know that you're in the presence of the divine. There's a pond where you can sit. There are the trails, the birds, the chipmunks, the sound of the breeze in the trees. It's too much. It's almost too much to bear. The wonder and awe. And for a long time, I was working at the school board at the time, and I used the term, Jackson Park is my cathedral. It wasn't built by human hands. It was a cathedral built by nature. Nature built that cathedral. And when I went in there, I knew I was one. I was embraced by the divine, by love and acceptance and belonging. It just overwhelmed me. But that was my cathedral. And that was just one experience, one time in my life. There have been others where I've had to unlearn the fall redemption religion in the spirituality that's within it, to unlearn it, and unfortunately, to relearn again. But now, I had the relearning as an adult. It came to me spontaneously and intuitively as a child. And I had to unlearn the fall redemption and relearn creation spirituality. The land, the water, the air, the fire, all of it. And I've had to do a lot of work on that for several years. And now I feel I'm ready to start talking about it in my Sunday homilies, to teach it, because I'm immersed in it myself. I couldn't do that for years because I was not deeply enough immersed in it. But what I saw here last week and what I see in today's paper, it's what I see. It's confirming what I saw. And now I see. The other part which sort of stuck me in the paper this morning, because we know that to a great extent, most of our churches, if they've anybody in them at all, most of them don't have very many, mostly seniors, old folks like myself, and when we all die off, not going to be many in the pews. We got 6 churches here in Peterborough. One would be enough. One. And yet we're spending all that money and people to keep 6 churches open. Why? It's not doing any good. Now, I think the institutional church will probably continue. There'll probably always be enough people. But what really struck me here in the paper this morning, which gave me real hope, here's the headline. Indigenous youth eye way back to the, quote, good life. And it's a story of 5 young people, First Nations, of course, and they are working, they all have a good career. It's in the north. It's in the north, not that far away. I think it's either Sudbury or North Bay or Thunder Bay. It's in that area. And what they're doing is they are unlearning what they call decolonization. They're young people. And they're doing this on their own, and they're telling their stories of what their elders have told them. But now they're telling their stories themselves. And they're working with nature, in nature. And I think it's a sign that things are improving. They're young people. Their young people have found a way back to unlearn what was imposed on their ancestors, to unlearn it, and to learn again, learn as a continuum, what I call creation spirituality. And they call it decolonization journey, a decolonization journey. But this is young people. And they're young people who have a very good career, musician, artist, working in different jobs, and that's what they're doing. And of course, again, it's the spirit, the great spirit is what their driving power is, if you will, the great spirit. And they all have really, really good jobs. And so financially, they're not rich, but they're making a good living. But they also are tending to their spirituality. And that's what I'm trying to get across today. Our young people here, our young people who have no time for church, maybe even not religion, they're telling us something. What do you see? What do you see when you look at your adult children or your grandchildren who have no time for Catholicism or Christianity? What do you see? And it seems to me that as adults, somehow we have a mission. That we have a mission to somehow point them back to unlearning. Unlearning. You know, in Quebec, the Pope spoke about Jesus. Well, you know, that's okay. I'm a strong friend of Jesus too. That's true. But it's a bigger thing. And to reduce it to Jesus is reductionism, of which we are famous for, reductionism. That's the expansion we'll have to look at. It's the universe. It's the universe, the cosmic Christ, and all of nature. Like we're barking down the wrong tree, if you will. And for him to bring up the idea of Jesus and becoming prayer and the grace of God, he's speaking a language that the young people don't know, and they're not interested in. Now, we only know, or I only know from reading the paper, how young indigenous people are unlearning decolonization and are learning for the first time who they are, what they are, and their spirituality. And they're doing it on their own. No, not on their own. They're doing it as a group of together. They're meeting together and they're doing this together. And so I just put that out because it gives me hope that maybe maybe some of our young people who either have given up on or, well, sure they've given up on it, no question, but maybe they never knew of it. Maybe that's a good thing because they've got a better starting point. And they too can clean their minds and souls of this fall redemption stuff and create a void. And into that void, they can fill it by learning about creation spirituality. And I feel called by God to proclaim this far and wide. Now, being in Peterborough, far and wide isn't very far, is it? Pretty limited, pretty small. But what the hell? I'll do it anyway. And that's what I feel. So I share that with you this morning. I know I don't know whether there's any help or not, but I share this kind of a lot of it is my own journey, my own spirituality, and but what I see by looking at the pictures. And I think if we would look and see, what do you see? What do you see? But how you see. And if you're going to really see, you've got to have your eyes open. What does that mean to open your eyes? Awareness, raised consciousness, new eyes, new ways of seeing. We've got to let go of the old way of looking, find a new way of seeing. And if and when we do, our young people, we're not going to change. We're not going to change, I don't think. Probably too old to change, most of us who are listening to me. But the young people, I hope, somehow would be inspired by the same spirit which led me as a kid to spend time in the tall pines. I hope that somehow the Great Spirit will lead our young people to go to the parks. Even in our cities, go to the parks. If you're in the country, go to the countries. Go where nature is. And let the Spirit, the Great Spirit, be your teacher in and through creation. The best teacher anywhere is creation, is nature. God bless. Bye.